and talking about something which is very, very topical. No one could have failed to notice the exposure to AI in the last 2.5 years, but talk specifically how it can be useful for forensic science in the context of either that research that we may be doing or that background reading and scholarly activity we do to inform our casework. So I aim to, in this short talk, give you a brief overview of some of the issues associated with AI with a positive spin, show you a couple of tools which I think are really, really useful and can enhance our work, and then move finally to some of the broader issues around AI. So let me start off with the big picture. I'm assuming that most people know what Gen AI is. So it's generative artificial intelligence. So it's an AI engine that uses mathematical probability to predict the answer to questions, but in a fluid-like, human-like response. Um, it's based on something called a large language model. So it's initially they were trained on specific data sets, but now they use the internet effectively in order to gather their information. And their fluid like human response makes it feel like you're chatting to someone or something. And they're incredibly interactive. And if you've not played around with one yet, I do advise you do so. Um, I doubly advise that you do so if it's been a while since you've had a go on one, because using one of the most common platforms, ChatGPT, it's now on its large language model 5, and its efficiency has improved massively, considering where it was only a year ago. Okay, so that's what the tools are. So they're widely available. There's lots of widely available free ones. What's that got to do with forensic science and forensic science research? Well, from the very early days when this became a commercial tool, people got very involved in the potential it could offer to our research, our scholarly activity, our casework. And really, people saw three great attractions to it. Um, one, one is around abstraction. So this is the idea that no matter what career path in, you collect an enormous amount of uh, data. Whether there's handwriting samples, chemical test data, or research papers, enormous amounts of data, and the sheer logistical processing paper and finding pens around takes an awful amount of time. And there can be a real efficiency of saving in using these Gen AI tools. You can effectively ask it to assimilate that in a quick and easy way to process things much more efficiently. And if you can process things more efficiently, you can probably look at larger data sets or more data sets. So people saw some real efficiency savings in using these tools. Secondly, more in a more abstract thing, much of what we needed to do pre-Gen AI in order to analyze things required complicated programs, lots of it, or the ability to program. You needed to code in order to get it to do specific functions. Well, Gen AI is extremely efficient at creating code in order to undertake political tasks. And then finally, in doing things at scale, and this is very, very broad, things that take a long time manually, like creating infographics. So, say you want to read your research or your case findings in a visual format, that can take a lot of time. But certainly at a superficial level, Gen AI is really good at creating a template for doing those things. So people are really attracted to it. I mean, I've done this slide as a series of scales just because people are really, really concerned about some aspects of Gen AI. So, I mean, one of those is around the idea of blind spots and bias. So, all of the large language models are trained on data sets, as I mentioned. And the danger with any kind of training set is that it could perpetuate the emission or increase biases of different data. So the initial model of ChatGPT, ChatGPT 3 was trained on a very small corpus of literature, and I know it's changed since then. Of course, just like that, the models have got no way of verifying whether what they're accessing is, correct or verifiable, though you can be, with clever prompting, ask it to do some of those things. And of course, the danger when using information like that and trusting it at face value is that you could perpetuate the very incorrect errors. There's also some real accusations, of biases and marginalized voices not being included in the returns. Um, there's a big question about validation, about whether we can use these tools, how we trust them. That people come complacent with them. I mean, Gen AI does not think and never will think. It's just a mathematical tool. I know it gives you human-like responses, and it feels like it's speaking to you, but it's just using probability to derive the next word based on your output. One of the major questions around this area, forensic research, forensic casework, examine of forensic evidence, etc., is about transparency. And there's naturally a lot of reticence from governing bodies, journals, etc., about whether we can use this tool or not. And if we do use it, by which parameters can we use it? In what areas can and can't we use it? And how do we disclose it if we do use it? And how can that be tested? Particularly interested in the criminal justice system, in that particular context. Um, Data privacy and protection is a very, very big issue here. I mean, when you upload to most large language modules, particularly the open ones like ChatGPT, essentially, what you upload is being skimmed and read and included in the training data set going forward. So putting client data or sensitive casework, if essentially you're putting that into the public domain, and other issues around using, published work and such like in a similar context. Excuse me. Um, and then there's a final question just about resources in this regard, in terms of where does the material come from that used to train it, um, and secondly, the environmental impact. So there's lots of talk about the energy demands that Gen AI takes or uses, in terms of carbon output and running it. So there are lots of questions, but I think for the purpose of this talk, there are some real positives that we can talk about. And I'm going to jump into some tools in a minute. So I decided to focus on research, and I think Gen AI can be used in all different stages of the kind of forensic research or case review or whatever your particular personal context is. Excuse me. Um, from funding, helping writing proposals or research plans, um, you know, even tailoring those plans specifically to the expectations of particular sponsors or government policies, you're actually tailoring them to those. I think it's very good at research dissemination, translating your research into, I know, an expert witness report, peer-reviewed journal, an infographic, a series of PowerPoint slides. It can do that very, very, very efficiently. Um, it can also translate research outputs into other forms. So, which are relevant, things like, creating, patents or copyrights or productions of processes and policies based on what we've seen. But the idea that I'm particularly interested in is around ideation. And I think Gen AI is wonderful for that. Let me give you an example. Yeah, imagine a scenario, and I'm sure you can resonate this, where someone asks you for an idea and you sit there and you can't think of anything. However, if those same people said, "What about this as an idea?" straight away you can think of loads of different ways that you could change, modify, enhance it, and make it better. Now, Gen AI is really good at coming up with those kind of ideations. So it's really good at literature reviews. I'm going to give you some examples of that in a minute. I mean, there's so much information on the internet. It's way too much that we can ever read. We have enough time to. And it's really good at organizing, summarizing, and helping find a pathway through those things for you. It can actually help you write as well, based on those with structured prompts can help you draft those kind of things. I mean, whatever your particular field, whether that's research or doing a case review, often the first thing you want to do is navigate what people have done before and then frame it around your own work. And it's really, really good at that. I also think it's really good at, the general kind of research infrastructure. So improving workflows, so collecting and processing data, at the moment you'd have to use, if you're trying to make something like a figure, with mathematical data in, you might have to use a complicated program, you know, you know, um, API program or something, but you can use Gen AI to do that for you. You can also improve your overall research infrastructure. So if you're, doing a survey or interviewing people about something, you can get it to critique your questions. You can even get it to act as a recipient, and you can chat with it to test out how these kind of things will work. And as I already said, it's really good at coding in the context of specific language. It can actually help with data collection as well. So, I mean, it can make up data, and that's a risk, but actually that can be quite useful if you use it right. So, if you're designing, a study, or you want to test a new method, we know we're all resource poor in terms of time and money. You could test it on a fake set of data from Gen AI just to see if there's any errors or things that need to be ironed out before you go useful. It's also really good at looking at unusual data. We've already seen handwriting samples and data from fire scenes. Example, these are specialist data sets which aren't like numbers in a spreadsheet, but you can train it to look at those. I mean, I happen to be done some handwriting work myself, and you can actually train it to look for specific features in handwriting images out of interest. And often, as I already said, it's really good at coming up with ideas in terms of idea generation. I mean, idea generation is a creative process rather than a fact checking or verification process for me. So we're competing with the ideation that Gen AI here can offset some human weaknesses. Um, so, so, in my sense, Gen AI can complement individual researchers during the idea process, um, because it can come up with a large breadth of ideas, but we can then, in humans on top, provide the specific detail. So now I was going to talk about some specific tools and give you something to take away. So I think there's lots of tools out there. Unfortunately, a lot of the Gen AI tools do require logins. Many of them give you a free access or free accesses to start with, but then they do require subscriptions afterwards. But I'm going to show you a couple of tools that give you some free examples. And I'm just going to stop sharing my slides and share my web browser just for a second to show you this instead. Which I am doing now. So we're now sharing my web browser. So the first tool I'm going to show you is Chat PDF. So you can see the web address up here, and it's a very, very simple tool, and there's many others like it. So once you go on there, I'm not signed in, but you can sign in. You can see in the top right here, you click on the button Upload PDF, and then you need to upload obviously a PDF document, and I've downloaded an open access paper here. So I've got an open access paper here, which you can see. And what you can see on the slides here on the right is it's got a summary of this abstract of this paper, and you can click on summarize this paper, and it provides you with a complete summary of the paper. So I find this personally useful, and would deal with the data protection question afterwards, in that sometimes I need to read about something, so I need to read about a new case study, or, need to read about an area. And I do a traditional literature or Google search, and I find 10, 15, 20, 50, 60 papers. And I don't have the time to read all those. And I can rule some out by looking at the abstract or the title, but I'm still left with quite a lot. I mean, look at this paper. It's 37 pages long. That takes an enormous amount of time. Sometimes by generating a summary, you can quickly think, oh, actually, this one doesn't look like it's as relevant as I thought it was, and remove it. Or you can think, oh, actually, no, this one is much more relevant than I look like. And you can actually talk to the paper. I am typing in the box at the bottom, critique the methodology, for example, question mark. And then it will. Certainly. So it's critiquing the methodology for me here, giving me the strengths and the weaknesses. So I'm looking for something specific within the context of a paper. It can really, really help, which I think is really, really useful. So that's a nice tool, Chat PDF, that one's called. The second tool I want to tell you is show you is Research Rabbit. So you do have to log into this one. So you can do one of two things. So you can either upload a specific paper or DOI, so digital identifying object, or you can look for C words. So it's always risky to do something live you've never done before, but let's have a go at it. So I'm going to look at the topic of the first talk I heard this afternoon, a graphology, and see if we can find a graphology paper on there. So watch the rabbit go. So what you're seeing now is it's found of a series of graphology papers. So let's look at Gomez Jimenez. So it summarizes the paper, and then you can dive deeper into this article in the bottom right, which shows you similar papers. So let's click on that. And this is the beauty of it. So what it's done here is showing a range of papers that are linked to this particular paper, based on a whole range of metrics. And you can see that they're clustered together based on similarity. And you can click on any of these and turn that one into the focus of the particular measure. Now, this particular tool, this perhaps is not the best example that I've ever used. In fact, I'm going to just go back to the original page, and do a different one, and upload a paper, I think, from my desktop instead, just to show you the full range of the tool. So to put the same one in here. I told you it's dangerous to do for this. Let's try one I know works. So let's use Harrison. So this one's much clearer. This is what I want to show you, which is all the arrows, which shows degrees of similarity. So this is the Harrison paper that I've just clicked on, the one with a little leaf on it. And the blue arrows are ones which directly link to it. But what you can see from here is there's a paper up here. Right, there's papers on the periphery here. So like this Humani one here, which isn't actually directly cited in the Harrison paper, but is connected by three other papers. So I find this tool really useful for identifying things I wouldn't have normally found. That's a really valuable way of finding new information and finding your way through the maze of literature that exists. So both those tools are really useful for very simple functions. So let me share my slides back again with you. So they're just two tools, and I'll give Research Rabbit and ideation, but there's also ones for searching based on keywords, ones which start to write papers for you on the corpus of literature, obviously all with issues. So please excuse, the next slides are just screenshots, just in case that we had any issues in terms of sharing in my web browser today. So that's just one example of how Gen AI can be used, just a simple example. And really, I could spend until tomorrow morning talking about all the different ways. But here's just some other interesting ways I think it's been used, which may be useful to people. I think it's really good at challenging assumptions. I'm an academic, a scientific academic, and it can formulate, and I formulate research problems. But Gen AI can take a role that is deliberately critical of my viewpoint. So I can essentially invite it or tell it to argue against whichever theoretical lens or point that I'm trying to make, to give it an alternative view. Researchers are often really vulnerable to making type theories. That is asking questions that are not really that relevant or useful. I mean, that's really useful in a forensic context. And to avoid this trap, we can use Gen AI as a partner that can challenge, our rationality and ensure that we don't fix prematurely on some sort of lens to formulate the problem and develop a poor research question. I've already mentioned that it can create synthetic data. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that we should publish or use that, but high quality, high volume synthetic data that mimics the characteristics of real data, can be really useful at training data sets for testing, training practitioners. They can design test models to improve their efficiency and obviously ensure data protection. If you've got real case data, you may not be able to or want to use that when training people. I mean, for example, a Gen AI, I've seen it before, can create synthetic medical records, which preserves patients' privacy, but it creates a new way, of analyzing, that data in a safe context. And something else I've seen it do is it can stimulate future states of the world. So Gen AI can forecast future scenarios by using historical data and current data. So when it does this at scale, it can evaluate kind of a large number of conditions and variables and incorporate elements of uncertainty to produce some sort of comprehensive and diverse scenario. So perhaps an example, I use an economics one because it's easier. An academic could examine potential threats such as economic downturns, supply chain failures, any new technology or policy developments. Um, and given the highly uncertain nature of business, and economics, they can help inform, theory, practice, mitigations, risk assessments, and those kind of things. So it can challenge your hypothesis of that remind. I mean, it's phenomenally good at finding patterns. Well, phenomenally good at identifying patterns, whether it's the true patterns or what if they mean anything is an interesting idea. So, yeah, before you move on to confirmatory analysis, often, you need to identify patterns, and they can use the technology to detect any interesting patterns, which may be predicted from something else. Also, quite interestingly and linked, it can be used to discover anomalies. So, researchers could upload a data set and ask it to identify any anomalies that derivative from what you expected. I mean, there's a tendency to ignore those for sure in real research or try and explain them away. But that unexpected spike or change with Gen AI could actually be linked to something real and may lead to a further research question. And perhaps the number one thing I've seen Gen AI for is translation. So it's wonderfully efficient at translating language. So obviously I speak English as my mother tongue. It can translate into almost every language on planet Earth fairly efficiently, even fairly obscure languages not spoken by many people like Welsh. And I'm an educator, so I've seen students, international students whose English is their second tongue, translating academic research papers into native tongue in order to help understand them, writing in native tongue, then translating, and then editing that translation as a way to show that to demonstrate their knowledge. And I think that's fantastic. Too often, a barrier has just not been people's knowledge in their brain, but just their ability to speak English. And I think that's truly fantastic. So my penultimate slide is just to come back to some of these contentious issues because we have to be aware of them. So there's one around inventorship and patentability, two boxes on my thing. I mean, recently, US case law has held that inventors of patents must be human beings under the US Patent Act, which is interesting because there's a deluge of AI generated ones. And they must document human contribution and disclosure of the nature of how Gen AI was used in order to be essential for patent eligibility. And we'll see that's a common theme in the other boxes. So they have to show things like, what did they put into the Gen AI tool? What was the output? What was the human influence? What was the contribution of individual inventors? And obviously, when we're talking about financial contribution, that's very, very important. I mean, copyright and authorship's very, very contentious as well. Excuse me. Under current US copyright law, copyright can protect only materials, but products of human creativity, and authors of copyright materials must be human beings. So the reason this is contentious is obviously the output from Gen AI is obviously computer derived from a large language model, but where did it get its input from itself? And you may have seen high profile cases, including well-known authors like George R. Martin, um, 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 legally challenging the use of their work being to train large language models. And there's cases from authors, from music artists in the UK, the European Union, and the US. And this is going to rumble on for many, many, many years, I am sure. And finally, authorship. I mean, can a Gen AI tool be an author on something like a case report or an academic article? I mean, I say that they do not deserve author credit. And the reason I say that, as an author, everything I present, including these slides today, I am ultimately responsible for, you know, and a Gen AI cannot take responsibility. It doesn't think. So that means that if we use Gen AI in any context, we are responsible for checking the correctness of anything that it says, and any errors that are in there. If we don't identify them, that is on us. So I think that's a really important point to make. So my final slide before I take any questions, if we have a few minutes to do so, is oh, sorry, I didn't move on the slide there. The slide is just to give you a bit of a summary of my position on there. I think, I speak to a lot of people about Gen AI. It's something I've become very involved in recently. And, some people are still hiding underneath the table with regarding Gen AI, as in it will go away eventually. You know, I'm absolutely confident that is not the case. And in fact, the tools will get better and better. So I think it's important that we realize that the forensic researchers behind us, the younger generation, will be using these tools in all aspects of their work. I actually think they should be using these tools in their work because of the reasons I outlined on slide 1, but only appropriately. And that institutions, now whether that's universities, colleges, or workplaces, need to give colleagues access to appropriate tools with appropriate security considerations, but most importantly, help them become Gen AI literate. That responsibility, that human authorship, that ethical use, uploading copyright material, all those kind of things. Only by understanding what the limits, what's available, in terms of these tools and the risk of the use, can we become better and improve our functions. So I hope there was something there useful for you, and I'll give you a challenge to finish. So at some point today, I suggest you choose an academic paper or a report or a case study that you know well, put it up into chat PDF and get the summary and compare the summary it gives you with your knowledge of that paper. How does it compare? And, take that same paper and put it in something like Research Rabbit and see if it identifies a piece of reading that you haven't spotted before, which may be relevant to your work. So that's my takeaway for you. Thank you very much.